Let's begin with a prayer. You may stay in your seats and please bow your heads. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Almighty God, we give you thanks for giving us this day in which we can participate in the great freedoms that we have in this wonderful country of ours. We are thankful for Representative Mario Diaz-Balart for being with us today to discuss with us some issues that are concerns for all of us, especially those of us who are concerned with the right to life, those of us who are concerned with religious freedom, and those of us who are concerned about a religious test for holding public office. This country is a gift from God. We are an exceptional nation. We must always defend our freedom. We thank you, Lord, for the many gifts that you have given us, especially the gift of human life, and for the great blessings you have bestowed on this country over these almost 250 years. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen. Well, before we begin, I want to introduce some folks who I think deserve some recognition for helping us to put this program together, this conversation with Congressman Diaz-Balart. I'd like to recognize the Knights of Columbus. If you are a member of the Knights of Columbus, please stand. The Knights exist in order that we can serve God and country, and the fourth degree, known as the Assembly, has as its motto patriotism. And so we thank the fourth degree Assembly for enabling this event to take place. I want to also thank the Columbiettes who are here today, who have helped to make this room so comfortable as it is today. I want to sincerely thank Congressman Balart for being with us today. You know, he is the representative, United States representative in Florida for the 25th District. And his district goes right across the state, right across Alligator Alley, for the most part, from Miami to those of us here in Naples, at least most of us here in Naples. He has been a champion for religious liberties. He's been a champion for human rights. He's been in Congress 18 years. That's nine terms in Congress. And before entering Congress, he was a state senator and a state representative right here in Florida. I want to express my sincere gratitude to the Congressman for agreeing to come and speak to us about the issues that I have just mentioned. And then when the Congressman is finished speaking, we'll have some time for questions and answers. And I will alert you as to how we're going to do that when the Congressman completes his remarks. Congressman, thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Should I come up here? Brother, thank you so much for the opportunity. You know, before I start, those of you that that know me know that I always thank a group of people who are not here. I always start by thanking a group of people who are never in the celebrations and the picnics and the family gatherings and the parties. But through my dear friend here, if I may, and thank you for your service. I always start by thanking those men and women who allow us to live in freedom and who sacrifice their lives, their family, their time, their treasure. And those are the men and women of the United States Armed Forces. So thank you for them for allowing us to be here. I actually will, if that's all right with you, I'm going to keep my remarks very brief. I'm a Catholic. Most people know that. I was brought up that way. By the way, my father didn't start out as a Catholic. But eventually, after years of studying, and he actually went to seminar school, back and forth as to whether he was going to be a Catholic or not about a Catholic, and then he ultimately ended up being a very devout Catholic. My mother was always a Catholic. That's how I grew up. And let me tell you why I'm thrilled to be here with all of you. Because as Christians, as Catholics, as I am, and as Christians, we not only are told about love, but we're commanded to love one another. We're commanded to love one another, and we're told that mere tolerance of each other is not enough, that we have to love each other. And I will tell you that it's a message that I think is not heard or maybe even spoken enough outside of the houses of worship. And I just have to point to the public discourse. By the way, in Washington, but not only in Washington. And it seems that in our country right now, should I say that the public discourse has gotten sometimes even rude and hateful. I have a line when I speak to schools, which I try to do from time to time as much as I can. I love speaking to young folks. And I have a line which I remind them every day. I say, the United States, Americans, we have a lot of enemies. We do. We have folks around the world that want to kill us just for who we are, what we stand for. But I remind particularly young people that while we have a lot of enemies, other Americans are not the enemy. So we can have disagreements and disagree vehemently. But I think as Christians and as Catholics, we really have to show the way as to how you can do so respectfully. And yes, there I even say with love and tolerance, which is why I'm so thrilled, Father, that you've allowed me to be in front of this wonderful group. We can lead by example, and we must lead by example. It seems that now in our country, we spend more time talking of each other, to each other, than with each other. And that's why I love opportunities like this, to have conversations. Because this country's facing big issues. We have big differences. But we're also unified by so much more than divides us. And so again, Father, thank you for the opportunity to be able to share some time with you. There are big, big issues, some that you will agree with me on, I hope, and others that you will disagree with me, I know. And you know something? Thank God for that. Thank God that we live in a country where we can agree or disagree, but folks in uniform have been giving their lives for generations precisely so that we can agree or disagree, but that we can speak our minds. But again, I think it is important to remind others as Christians, as Catholics, that while we can do it with conviction and with energy, we need to always do it with respect and, yes, when you're dealing with fellow Americans, with love. So with that, I look forward to spending some time with you. My only caveat is the reason I'm going to have to leave is because I'm going to have to pick up my son later on, which is something that I only get to do when I'm in town. And unfortunately, as you know, we spend a lot of time in D.C. But I have quite a bit of time. I look forward to this conversation. I thank you for doing what you do. I will tell you that as a Catholic, one of the things that upsets me is you always hear about the flaws. By the way, I say that as a Catholic. You always hear about the flaws of the Catholic Church, and so little is said about the wonderful things that Catholics do to help those in need, to help those with the least in our community, in our country, by the way, and around the world. And I would add that as Americans, we are often criticized. And I remind folks that no country has been more generous in the history of humanity than this, the greatest nation that God has ever allowed men and women to build on this planet. It's a privilege to be with you. And that, I'd love to have a conversation, if that's all right with you, Father. Perfect.
Well, I certainly concur 100% with what the congressman said. So much so, I'm going to send them envelopes. We'll see. Every Catholic should receive envelopes.
That's right. That's right.
We know the congressman has a busy schedule. His son's name is Christian. Am I correct?
That's right.
Okay, and he's going to spend some time with Christian. We can certainly understand his desire to be with his son. What we are going to do now is have some time for questions and answers from the congressman. And we're going to ask the members of the Knights of Columbus and Columbiettes to be the first ones to get to the microphone. And then if we have time, we'll open it up to other guests that are here today. Congressman?
Congressman, thank you. The Knights of Columbus of Southwest Florida are organizing to become an active statewide as a force to support legislators who will advocate for legislation to prevent abortions and to assure the free practice of religion. How can the Knights assist you and other legislators who are pro-life and advocates of religious freedom achieve your goals?
Yeah, great question. It's amazing in our country what you can do if you decide to get active. It's amazing one can do if you decide to get active. You asked a very specific question, right? What can you do? Let me give you a couple of specific examples. Right now, in the House of Representatives, Father and I, if I may say so, just walking in, we just, in passing talked about how I was telling him that if somebody would have told me that a governor of a state in a public forum would be talking about the concept of delivering a baby, and then after that baby is born alive, keeping the baby comfortable until deciding whether you're going to kill it or not. I would have told you no, not at that level. We've had disagreements on, I happen to be pro-life. We've had disagreements with folks that are not. But that level now is new, right? And you have, for example, in the state of New York, legislation that was passed, signed by the governor, which in essence says that you can take a life after it's born, in essence, which is something that I will tell you, I think shocked a lot of us. So, specifically to your point, in the House, for example, we have been trying to bring to the House floor a vote on just that. Should you, once a child is born, should that child have the protections of every American? Which I would argue is yes. We have not been able to get the leadership in the House to allow us to have a vote. So what can you do? That's a perfect avenue to say, look, we're asking for a vote. So we'll have people that disagree with me and maybe with you or not, and that's okay. But we should have a vote on that issue. Just this last 2 weeks, in the Appropriations Committee that I'm privileged to serve on, we had multiple votes on issues like, for example, whether we should protect a child who, after an abortion, is born alive. Should that child receive the medical care that any other individual would receive? And we were not able to prevail on that, which I thought was, again, it's a different place than we have been on that issue for a number of years. I would argue that the majority of the American people, however, are not at that place, are not willing to accept that if a child is born alive, when a child is born alive, that child deserves no protection, no medical care. So activism on things like that, I think, is highly appropriate. And on issues that are important to you. And I would just encourage you that it's amazing what folks can do if they decide to, number one, get involved. Number two, become, because I'll tell you what's not effective. What's not effective is, and you see that a lot, what's not effective is just kind of like, yelling at folks. No, but if you actually get the facts and you talk about the facts, it's amazing how sometimes you can sway folks. So I think the time is right. The moment is just. And I think you're going to see a lot of folks that are going to try to help you if you, in fact, decide to get active and to support issues like that.
Good afternoon, Congressman.
How are you,
Thanks for being here. Congressman, not too long ago, 3 U.S. senators questioned the suitability of a appellate court nominee because he was a member of the Knights of Columbus. Do you have some comments for us on that, sir?
Yes, I do.
And
I will-
I would also like to ask what your feeling is regarding a religious test for public nominees.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. No, thank you. I think that's a very on-point question. Yeah, I saw that as well, by the way. People saying that you, in essence, should be disqualified because you have individuals that are members of the Knights of Columbus. Now, see, I happen to believe that being a member of the Knights of Columbus says a lot about a human being. It says that it's a person who's caring, a person who wants to be helpful, a person who's loving, a person who believes. And so, first place, not only should that not be a disqualifier, I think that should be something that one should be very proud of because of what that says, number one. Number two is, whether you disagree with me or not, and that's fine, the concept that if you happen to be a believer, that you are disqualified, to me is frankly very dangerous. Look, I wasn't around. I was a little kid in the beginning of the 1960s. I was born in late 1961. But I do remember, because we've all read about it, right, that there was this whole concern, and was it possible to have a Catholic president? Or would that Catholic president be subjected to the rule of the Vatican, right? I think now we kind of look back at that and we say that's absurd. It is absolutely absurd. And yet, I think you have some folks who are, in essence, are trying to now have, I think you called it what, a religious test, which I think is highly dangerous. Faith, religion, should not be a factor for your qualifications as a juror. And I go back to what I said at the beginning. For me, if anything, somebody who is a member of the Knights of Columbus should be revered and thanked, because it shows that this is a person who cares so much about others that they're willing to go out of their way and live like that in serving others. So again, I think it's a dangerous situation and I by the way concur with you that I believe that is a religious test. That's in essence, if you're part of this religion, we don't want you. We don't accept you. That is totally unacceptable, and I think most Americans would agree with that.
Thank you.
I'm going to pull a Marco Rubio and do the water thing, right? How are you?
Very well, and yourself?
Great, pleasure, thank you.
Several states have recently passed an anti-abortion legislation. In your opinion, should anti-abortion advocates work state by state to pass pro-life legislation? Or should anti-abortion advocates attempt to persuade the U.S. Congress to pass legislation which would ban most abortions?
That's a very good question. As someone who's been a pro-life person, even back when I was in the state legislature a million years ago, our fight was always to allow the states to make those decisions. Allow the states to make those decisions. And I'm a firm believer that that's the right way to go. Allow the states to make those decisions. I think there are extenuating circumstances where sometimes the federal government should step in. Let me tell you one of those, what I believe, this is my opinion, and again, I say this with great respect, and I respect if people disagree with me. I believe an extenuating circumstance is when you have a state going to what I respectfully believe is an extreme position of saying that a child that is born alive will not get the protections the full protections of a human being in this country. So I think, therefore, two-part answer. Number one is no, I like the fact that the states in our country can make decisions like this. That's something that as a pro-lifer, a lot of us have been fighting for many, many years. But as a member of Congress, I reserve the right, if there are extraordinary circumstances, to step in, which is why we're trying to do this respectfully, but in an asserted way, on these, I think, more extreme cases of saying no. You know, there's legislation, and I've been a very strong advocate of pro-life issues. There's legislation that and amendments that we have been debating already in the last couple of weeks. I sit on that committee, as I mentioned, where we, like it or not, we face everything before anybody else does, right? And sometimes we face issues that don't go anywhere else, but we fight them there. And so we've had, for example, a long-standing tradition in this country, tradition and legislation, that I'm pro-life, but if somebody isn't, but one thing that we've had an agreement is that taxpayer money should not pay for abortions. That's been a prohibition. But I would add, let's take it a couple steps further. What does that mean? It means that taxpayer money should not here domestically pay for abortions. But then we have the Mexico City policy, which also says we should not pay for abortions outside of the country. Taxpayer money should not pay for abortions. All of those battles right now are being relitigated in the House of Representatives. There's a new majority, and I get that. I feel relatively, let me restate that. While on some of these issues we may lose them in the House, I don't know of a president that has been more overtly, aggressively pro-life than President Trump. And I'm grateful, by the way. I personally, I'm grateful for his position, and he is not shy about it. And it's not lip service. It's not lip service. And lastly, I will tell you a frustration that all of us in the House have. In the House, when Republicans were in control of the House, and we had the majority in the Senate, but not the 60 votes required, we would always complain about the Senate. You know, oh my gosh, they can't get anything done. We pass all this stuff in the House, and nothing gets done in the Senate. And I would always remind my colleagues when they would say, well, you know, the Senate's got to change the rules. I'm like, yeah, they got to change the rules unless we lose the House or unless we lose the Senate. So in the Senate, it's very difficult to get anything done unless you get, frankly, nothing gets done without 60 votes. So while we are relitigating some of these issues in the House, and we're losing those votes, unfortunately, not a surprise, in the House, I am very confident that in the Senate, these positions that are long-standing positions of the American people will prevail, and that if for some reason in the Senate it didn't, this president would veto it. So I feel pretty good there. However, it is important that we continue to educate people, to talk to people. And again, I find it that this is just me speaking, I find it that one is more effective when you can have real conversations. Can I tell you what I tell people about, again, I'm pro-life. And people say, well, but you know, it's not a viable, and I go, look, yeah, I'm not a scientist. I really am not. Should we allow the taking of a life of a child? I used to say after it's born. Now you have some states that have said yes, unfortunately. But should we allow the taking of a life of a child when it's 6 months after birth? People say no. Most Americans, right? I used to say 6 hours after birth, and most Americans would tell you no. 6 hours before birth? No. 6 weeks before birth? I'm not a scientist. I don't know where to draw the line, but you know what I do know? Is that being becomes you and me. And it's life, and it's human life. And I think, because I don't like the federal government a lot, the longer I'm there, the less I like it. Seriously, the less I trust it. It's a necessary evil. But I do think that one of the things that the federal government must always do is protect innocent life. So then the debate is, when does innocent life begin? That's always been the debate. Now that debate has changed to no, it's even in the case of New York, when it's born, which I think is unacceptable, and that's when the federal government has to step in, and we're going to try to do that. We're going to try to do that.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you for coming, Congressman.
My privilege.
Okay. Should the U.S. Congress be considering and legislating upon the subjects of euthanasia, assisted suicide, and rationing out the end-of-life medical treatments?
So, another very, very, very important question. Let me refer to my answer on the previous question. Again, on the pro-life issues, those of us would always fight for the states, giving the states the ability to do that. And I think that's the way we should always do it. Try to allow the states to do that. And I mentioned that there are some extreme circumstances which I think Congress has to reserve the right to act. And I mentioned what, for example, some of those are. The last part of your question you said was what? The last part?
Rationing out.
Yeah, can I talk a little bit about that specifically? Because I kind of answered the question a little bit on the previous one, but you've given me a great opportunity to kind of go into something else. What has now become hip is to talk about what now people call Medicare for all, which, by the way, you know what that means, right? That means Medicare for none. But one of the main reasons, let me restate that, one of the many reasons that I've always had issues with the federal government controlling our health care, one of the issues is what you just talked about. I believe that health care should be up to individuals with their doctors and their family. I believe that you should have choices, competition, options. And the problem with this whole thing now that you're hearing a lot, it's not new, but now you're hearing it with a new, it used to be called Obamacare. Now that's not good enough. And now it's Medicare for all. You know what that is? It's government control, a government takeover of our healthcare system. Right. And some would argue, folks, I don't agree with this, that, well, if the government controls it, everything's going to be fine. Remember Ronald Reagan, right? Those words that you never hear, I'm from the government, I'm here to help you. And the problem is that it will inevitably lead to rationing. It will inevitably. By the way, you know one of the things that you don't hear about Medicare for all? And I had a conversation with some media folks, this is a while ago, and I said, part of the problem that I have with this Medicare for all is you realize that Medicare goes away. And these journalists said, well, that's not true, though. It's not true. I said, have you read the bill? It does. Healthcare, private healthcare is, in essence, outlawed. Private insurance is outlawed. The vast majority of Americans get their healthcare through employer-provided insurance. That would be outlawed. In other words, you would have to go into this government-controlled, government-provided Washington, all the wonderful brainiacs in Washington to decide our health care. And one of my fears is that it would lead precisely to that, to rationing, to decisions made not by you and your family, me and my family, about what's best for our families, but some bureaucrat in Washington. I think that is a very, 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 very negative proposition. To me, healthcare is very personal for most Americans, for all Americans. And I think as opposed to that solution that some advocate, which is let's have government take it over and control it, see, I'm just the opposite. I want to make sure that we do anything and everything to bring back control to the individual, to the people, to the family members with their doctors. That's where the decision should be made. And sometimes I get that. They're tough decisions, right? But do I rather have a decision about end of life made by my wife, my family, or some bureaucrat in DC? Heck, you know the answer to that.
Thank you for coming. The Equality Act was recently passed in the House.
Yep.
Will you please highlight the major provisions of the bill and your analysis of the pros and cons of its contents on the following subjects? A, Restoration of Religious Freedom Act. B, Impact upon religious schools and nonprofits. And finally, C, the status of transgender students to compete in sports and to have full access to bathrooms and locker room facilities.
All of which are real concerns and serious concerns. I voted for it. I'm sure you heard about it. I haven't gotten too much heat about that. And let me tell you why. Allow me to step back for a second. One of the interesting things that has happened since Nancy Pelosi has become Speaker of the House again, and you're seeing it in every issue, is she has not decided to put things on the floor of the House, things that are negotiated, things that, can potentially get bipartisan, strong bipartisan support. She has put a lot of messaging bills on the House. So when you ask about those very important issues, here's the problem. If you look at the actual bill, there's pages. The total thing is only 18 pages. It's all findings. The actual provision is a few lines. So you pose some very important questions. This bill doesn't answer those questions one way or the other. When I voted the way I did, let me tell you why I did. And by the way, I respect, understand folks, however they voted on this issue, or however they believe on this issue. But number one, I have dedicated my years of public service fighting for religious freedom. Going back to the state legislature, and now. And I can even go through bills, legislation that I've sponsored, that I've co-sponsored, that I voted to guarantee religious freedom in our country, which is crucial. By the way, also guarantee the ability of Catholic schools to be Catholic schools, Christian organizations to be Christian organizations. By the way, not only Christian, non-Christian organizations and schools. So I have my record on defending religious freedom, I will tell you, I will put next to anyone's. And it's there. I've also spent decades fighting against discrimination. All types of discrimination. So here I was presented with a choice. A bill that's, in essence, while a lot of findings, a few lines, where you could theoretically say some of these horrors that I have issues with some, and I put that in writing, by the way, in my release, some of the concerns that I have potentially are not addressed adequately. But you see, I didn't develop this bill. This was developed by Nancy Pelosi to put people on the spot. And in essence, what she said is, here's a vote, do you condone discrimination or not? That was her purpose, by the way. That was her purpose. I wish that she would have, and by the way, no surprise that she didn't, that she would have given folks like me and others an opportunity to work through it. I wish we had the opportunity to sit down and deal with some of the specific issues that are not dealt with one way or another in this bill. But that's not the option that I had. So I was confronted with, do I vote, in essence, what I believe, and I respect everybody else, I do, a vote to, in essence, condone or not condone potential discrimination. So just like I have fought for religious freedom, and I will continue to do so, if I'm asked to vote, in essence, to say discrimination is potentially acceptable, I can't do that either. So was it a fun vote? No. Easy vote, there's no such thing as an easy vote if you take your job seriously, and I do. So, where are we? The reason it's called a legislative process is because it's a process. So, if the Senate moves a bill forward, will it be the House bill? No. No. If the Senate moves a bill forward, it's going to be a lot different. I would hope that if a bill moves forward in the Senate, that some of these specific issues that you're dealing with, that you're mentioning, which are legitimate, are dealt with one way or another. And I may agree or disagree with how it's dealt with, but are dealt with one way or another. That was not the purpose of the House bill. It was a up or down, which way do you want to go? And so, like I have dedicated a lifetime, and again, I mentioned this, I will put my record on protecting religious freedom next to anybody's. By the way, in Congress or anywhere. With deeds, with words, and with votes. But I also have, when I have to make a decision as to, well, will you vote to, in essence, condone discrimination? I can't do that. I can't do that. So, will this move forward? No, the House bill is not going to be heard in the Senate. If there's a Senate bill, I'm confident that it will be something that where these specific issues, and again, if they do that, I or you may not agree with the details, but that's what the process is for. And I'm hoping that these issues are dealt with in a more thorough, thought out way where folks have the opportunity. By the way, in the House, we weren't allowed to bring up amendments, for example, on the House floor. That's not unique to this issue. That's what's going on with most issues in the House these days that get to the floor, and that is not much different than how Speaker Pelosi did it when she was Speaker a few years ago.
Okay, well, we promised the congressman that he would be able to go home on time, spend some time with his wife and his son.
No, my wife, the problem is that she can't pick him up. I have to.
Exactly. She's waiting for you too, I'm sure. It's wonderful to have this conversation with our congressman, and for you to give us this time. We very, very much appreciate your opening remarks about respect. We thank you for answering the questions that we've proposed to you. We understand that it is a process, and I certainly believe that your heart is in the right place. I encourage you to keep up the battle for defense of human life and for religious freedom in our country, and also to make sure that there is never a test for holding public office in this country. Absolutely. Also, I'm concerned sometimes detect some anti-Catholicism out there. And the Knights of Columbus exist to prevent anti-Catholicism, to put the face of the church out in the public square, to show that no one has anything to fear from the Catholic Church. We love God. We love this country. And the Knights will do everything they can to defend all the freedoms that we have. Congressman, I thank you from the bottom of my heart for being here. And I hope that you'll be able to come back sometime. But next time, I hope when you come back, we won't have to ask these questions. What are we doing with Venezuela and Cuba? I hope that you will relay to your friends in Congress that Maduro must go, as well as Castro's puppet in Cuba and Nicaragua. Thank you so much. God bless you.
Can I say one more?
Sure, please. One more word. Okay.
You just reminded me, and I think I may have mentioned it in passing at the beginning, but when you mentioned that there is, I think there's a pretty organized it's not an anti-religion thing, it's an anti-Christian, Catholic thing. And it's accepted. It's really interesting. If that same sentiment were said about others, I think there'd be a lot of pushback. And so I hope that I express that as a Catholic, I'm proud of the Catholic Church. I really am. Because Enrique Padron was just reminding me. We spent a lot of time, as you mentioned at the beginning, Father, I represent 3 counties, right? So I spent a lot of time in the car. And today, with my team, we were just talking, and we said, my gosh, I don't have the numbers, but I guarantee you, if you put the numbers of people that have been and are currently being helped by Catholics, it's going to be much larger than any government service and any government, period. And that's something that we should be talking about. We should not be shy about expressing our faith. We should not be shy about showing what we stand for. We should not be shy. And I will leave you with this last thought. Remember that last hurricane that hit here, and in particular hit the district that I represent, Everglades City, Chokoloskee Island, Plantation. They got pulverized. And you know what I saw there, Father? When you saw the volunteers, and it was an amazing, the worst catastrophes always bring out the best in our country. And so there are volunteers from across the country, but a large portion of them were people of faith. And so that is something that I carry with me every day. I know that I am the most blessed human being in the history of humanity. No, I really am. I have a son who I'm going to see tonight who is a blessing and a miracle. He's totally healthy. He was born with incredibly harsh health issues. Spent the first 5 months of his life in intensive care. He's going to be 14 in December, and he is 100% healthy and perfect. I have a wife who is not my wife, who is my soulmate. She's everything to me, who's a cancer survivor. I come from a family. I was born in the United States. I come from a family who lost their country. My father was 32 years old when he actually had gotten elected. He was a House member in Congress in Cuba, got elected to the Senate, and this is something that I think about. He was 32 years old. He was on a trip, goes to sleep, December 31st, 1958, as a 32-year-old senator-elect, wakes up the next country, doesn't have a country, doesn't have a passport, has no money, has no way to move, to travel. So when I say that I'm the most fortunate and the luckiest person in the history of humanity, I know it to be true. And to be able to work on, and we'll agree or disagree. Do you imagine for me what it feels like? To walk under that dome and fight for the issues that I believe in? And yeah, I'm going to make mistakes. And knowing that my son is healthy because he was treated by doctors and nurses here in this country, and my wife is healthy because she received care in this country, and I'm able to fight, and I fight for veterans, and I fight for the strongest defense that we can have, and I want to make sure that our senior citizens have what they have paid for and deserve. And if you don't think that I don't remember that every single moment when I'm up there, I do. It is a blessing. It is a privilege. It is an honor, like it is for me a blessing and a privilege and an honor to be with you today. So, Father, you said you'd like to have me back. Oh my gosh, I would love to. Thank you all so much. Thank you so much.
Can we close with God Bless America? And if you'd let the Congressman be able to exit without holding him back from his family. God bless America.